Resourceful Designer, episode 134, How to Politely Turn Away Clients.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He can't concentrate if his favorite mechanical pencil is missing. Mark Dickout.
Welcome to the podcast. This week is a follow-up to last week's episode where I shared 12 red flags for spotting bad design clients. Now, if you haven't heard last week's episode yet, episode 133, I strongly suggest you stop this episode right now, go back and listen to that one, because I'm going to be referencing it throughout this episode. And it would be a lot easier if you knew what I was talking about based on my discussion from last week's episode. So right now, I'll give you a couple of seconds to hit your stop button, go find the last week's episode, episode 133, listen to it, and come back. Are you back? Did you enjoy last week's episode? Great. Well, this week, I'm going to share polite ways to turn down those bad clients. Now, I'm also going to share a resource that helps you promote yourself, or at least it may, and I will end with a great question from Audrey about what files to provide to clients. Now, I've been really busy this week. I finished up a long-standing website project for a client. This is a project that I started close to 6 months ago. It's a huge e-commerce site, and we've been going back and forth, and there's been some, I won't say scope creep. Well, actually, maybe I should say scope creep. But it all fell within the parameters of the initial discussion. Some stuff that we initially talked about that they said they would hold off, they decided to bring back in kind of at the last minute and have done. So it was technically part of the initial brief and the initial contract. And after we got started, they said, let's hold off on this. So they brought it back in, which meant it extended some deadlines, because if I would have done it along the way, it would have sped things up. But the fact that the website was almost finished when they decided to go back, and that was the thing. The website was almost finished, and they were so happy with it and with the time frame we had used and everything that they said, well, at this point, instead of holding off, why don't we just go ahead and implement these things right now? So I ended up doing those, which did delay things, but the client was okay with that. And then finally, on Monday, we launched the website. So I was very happy with that, especially considering that the way I bill is 50% upfront and 50% upon launch. So I got paid the initial down payment over 6 months ago. And luckily, this is a really good client. When I told them, I says, you're ready to launch? Well, here's the invoice. And within 10 minutes, they emailed me. This is a local client. They emailed me and says, Mark, your check's ready to pick up anytime. So I hopped right in the car, went, picked up the check, stopped by the bank, deposited it, came home and launched the website. So that was pretty exciting for me. The other thing that happened this week, if you listened to last week's episode, maybe you just finished listening to it, as I suggested at the beginning of this episode. Well, last week I was talking about turning clients away. And at one point I mentioned how I turned a client away. It wasn't necessarily a bad client. It was just the client didn't fit. They had contacted me to do a sign because they had a property they were selling. And after discussing it with them, I realized that they didn't really need my design services. They didn't need to pay my fees for design. This was something that a sign company could have done very easily for them. So I referred them to a sign company, and they thanked me very much in that and went ahead and had their sign done. Well, they contacted me this week and first of all, thanked me for that referral. They're really happy with the sign they got, but they said they were really happy with the way I handled things and that I didn't try to milk them, was the words that they used. And they asked if we can have a meeting because they are rebranding. They have a business. This was unrelated to the sign that they were having made. They have a business that they're relocating from Ottawa, Ontario, closer to where I am. And they're also rebranding. They're changing a little bit of their strategy. It's a construction business, but they didn't like the way they're focused. They found it a little bit too confusing. It's all on the environmental part of construction. And they found their clients were a little confused. So they want to kind of refocus their branding on all that. And they decided to contact me again because they were impressed with the way I dealt with them on the phone the last time. And we have a consultation meeting on Monday to go over their whole thing. And in case you're curious, yes, I did tell them there was a charge for this meeting and they are okay with it. And if you're curious about what I'm talking about, go back and listen to episode 117 of the podcast titled How Changing My Title Grew My Design Business, where I now refer to myself as a design consultant. And what I'm doing with clients is if they want me to consult with them, there's a $200 fee to sit down with them and go over their brand strategy and everything. And the way I do it is if the client decides, thank you very much, that's great information, they're going to do something on their own or go somewhere else, I get paid $200 for the time I spent with them. But I do tell them if they do hire me to do the work, that $200 becomes a $200 down payment towards the work. So I don't lose out by going to meet the clients on a one-to-one basis, that my time involved in that, I don't lose out on that if I don't get the clients. So they agreed. We've got a meeting scheduled for Monday, and I'll keep my fingers crossed that it turns into what sounds like a very lucrative client, because they're a big enough business and they've been established for many years, but they decided, as I said, they want to rebrand, change their name, change the focus of the business. It's still in the same industry, but it just sounds like a very fun project, and I really hope to get it. So that's a couple of things that I've been up with this week. Now, like always, I like to share a tip or a resource of the week. And this week's resource is Pork Bun. Now, what's a pork bun, you may ask? Well, Pork Bun is a website that I'm familiar with it because they sell domain names. They also have hosting and other things, but I'm familiar with them for their domain names. I've purchased domain names through them before. It's porkbun.com. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, first of all, they were the first place that I knew of that offered the quote unquote specialty domain names other than the .net, .com, and .org and that. Although they do offer those ones. You can buy those through Pork Bun. But they were the first ones that I knew of that offered the specialty ones like .design. And the reason I want to share Pork Bun as a resource this week is right now, until the end of September, the end of this month. So by the time this is released, you have just over a week left. So hopefully you're listening to this shortly during the time it's released. They are offering a free year for every .design domain name that that you register with them. So one free year you get the domain for free. You don't have to pay a cent. Now, yes, when it comes time to renew it in a year, you will have to pay, and they're standard rates. But you get to get 1 year free for the domain. Now, why would you want a .design domain? Maybe you already have a .net or a .com. Well, these .design domain names are great for things like portfolios, resumes. If you happen to have a storefront, like not a physical store, but an online store for selling things, they're great for that sort of thing. Imagine if maybe you have a company, but you don't go under a company name, like you're not Acme Design. Your Jane Smith Design. Well, maybe janesmithdesign.com is taken, or .net. So you could get janesmith.design, or you can just use it as a resume page, janesmith.design, and here's all your resume, and then have your other stuff, your freelance or your home-based business at whatever website you want. But you have your resume at janesmith.design. So it's great to have these these domains, especially now that it's free for a full year. But .design is not the only one they have. Now, it's the only one I know of that they're offering for free right now. But they have a lot of other great domains that you may be interested in. There's .art, .boutique, .consulting, things like .gallery, .marketing. They have .photography or .photos, .solutions, and so many more. Think about it. A lot of designers are very creative people. Maybe you have a hobby outside of design that you like to do. Maybe you like to do painting, or you like to do woodwork or sculpting or stained glass or whatever. If you have a hobby in that and you want to display that stuff, you can get a .art or maybe a .gallery domain just for that. Maybe you do both. Maybe you do design and this other stuff and sell it. Well, look at it this way. Say I use Jane Smith to begin with. Say Jane Smith is a graphic designer, a web designer, but she also does pottery on the side and sells her creations. Well, she can have a janesmith.com website that kind of outlines everything she does. And if somebody wants the design services, they would click on a link that would take them to janesmith.design. And if they want the pottery stuff, they can click on a link that would take them to janesmith.either art or .gallery or something like that. If the person is a photographer, you can have your photos under a special .photography or .photos domain name. Now, these are great because they shorten things. So instead of having janesmithphotography.com, it's just janesmith.photography. So I think you're getting the point. Now, the other great thing about Pork Bun and why I like them is every single domain name you purchase through them has a private whois absolutely free. Now, if you're not exactly sure what that means, every single domain is registered and anybody can do a whois search and find out information about who owns the domain. They find out your name, they find out your telephone number, they find out your email address and your physical address. And most places offer a private whois, it means hiding this information from people that look it up, but there's usually a fee involved. Well, Pork Bun offers this absolutely free for every single domain name. The other thing they offer for free is SSL certificates. Every domain you buy through them automatically gets a free SSL certificate if you so choose to use it. And it doesn't matter if you're hosted through them or hosted somewhere else. You can have a secured website at no extra charge. Now, some hosting providers do this, but there's a lot that don't offer the certificates. You have to pay extra for them. So anyways, I've been a member of Pork Bun for a few years now. I have a couple of .design names, including Resourceful Design for the Resourceful Designer. Now, I do use resourcefuldesigner.com as my main one, but I do have the name. If you type in resourceful.design, it will redirect you to Resourceful Designer. So if you're interested in either .design, .art, .boutique, .marketing, .solutions, whatever, there's hundreds of them to choose from. If you're interested, I do have an affiliate link with them, which is at resourcefuldesigner.com/porkbun. And that's pork, P-O-R-K, just like a pig, pork bun. And if you use that link, yes, I will make a small commission on any purchase you make, but I wouldn't share them with you if I wasn't already using them myself. So let me know if you do purchase a .design name or any of the other fancy domain names. I would love to know how you're using them. So hit me up if you do. And now, how to politely turn away bad clients. Now, in last week's episode, I shared 12 red flags for spotting bad design clients. So let's say you've used those red flags and you've spotted a potentially bad client. Great. You've just dodged a bullet. Somebody that you don't want to work with because you spotted one of those red flags. Now, unfortunately, spotting a bad client is only half the battle. The next hurdle is actually turning the client down. But here's the catch. You may be wrong about the client. They may turn out to be a great client down the road, but right now there's something about them that tells you you don't want to work with them. So just to be safe, you need to turn down that client in a way that doesn't burn any bridges, just in case they come back to you in the future, or for some reason you end up working again in the future, because who knows? So today I'm going to share some scripts with you on how to turn down clients. Now, don't worry about taking notes during the episode. All of these scripts can be found on the show notes page for this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 34. So as I said, I shared 12 red flags for you to look out for, but I'm not going to share 12 different scripts to use. Otherwise, this podcast would get really, really long. In fact, many bad clients or red flagged clients can be turned away using one simple letter or one script. There was some of the 12 flags I had last week are if a client has a bad reputation, a client that has inconsistent communications, a client that complains about previous designers, a client that flirts with you, and of course the dreaded, you just simply have a bad feeling about the client and don't want to work with them. Well, all of those clients fall under the umbrella of you just don't want to work with them. That's the reason. You just don't want to. There's no, well, if this happens, then maybe. It's no, you don't want to work with them. And the best way to avoid going any further with them is by sending them a letter, something like this. Dear, put in the client's name. Thank you for considering me or your business name for your, and then you insert the project here. Now, I'm just going to stop right now before I keep going any further. Every script or letter that I share with you today starts off the same way. They all start off with dear, then you have to put in the client's name. Thank you for considering, and you put in either me, or if you have a business, you put in your business name. Thank you for considering me, or thank you for considering Acme Design for your, and then you insert the project there. So for your logo design, for your rebranding, for your website, for your trade show booth, whatever it is. So I'm not going to repeat that for every single script I tell you today. I just want you to know that those little pieces, you can adjust them to whatever you need. So let me go back and start from the beginning. Dear client, thank you for considering me for your logo design project. It sounds like an exciting project. Regrettably, due to my current workload, I'm not taking on any new projects at the moment. Thanks again for considering me or your business name. I wish you success in your, and then again, logo design or whatever, regards, and then your name. And that's it. That's all you need to say. You do not need to provide an excuse as to why you can't work with them. You do not need an explanation or anything like that. Remember that no is a complete sentence. All you have to do is politely tell them that you are unable to take on new projects at this time and you wish them the best. Now, you may be saying, well, Mark, I am taking on projects. I need the work right now. So I'm actually lying to the client. Well, you know what? Technically, you're not. When you say that due to my current workload, I'm not taking on any new projects at the moment. Well, you're not taking them on at the moment because at the moment, you're dealing with that one client and you don't want to work with them. So at the moment, you're not taking on any new projects. So you're not technically lying to them. Now, one thing you have to be careful about is when you say this, the client may come back and say, well, when will you be taking on clients? Or how long do you think before you're taking on clients? And again, you don't need to give excuses. I personally, whenever I've done this, I would just let them know that for the foreseeable future. And that's my answer. And that's usually enough for somebody to say, oh, okay, thank you very much. And they'll go elsewhere. Because if you say, oh, I'm too busy, I can't take on another client for a month or 2 months, that sometimes can backfire on you. And the client could say, oh, well, that's no problem. I'll wait. Even if the client came to you with a deadline, they came to you and they said, I need this thing done by, within 2 weeks or by the end of the month. And then you say, oh, well, sorry, I can't due to my workload. I'm not taking on any new projects at the moment. I couldn't take anybody on for another 2 months. The client might all of a sudden come back and say, well, that deadline that I told you, it's not that important. I'll wait to work with you. And then you're in a pickle because you can't turn them down again. So just say for the foreseeable future, you can't. And if by chance you do end up taking on another client and this client finds out about it, you can just say your current workload, your situation changed and you were able to take on clients, but you thought that they had moved on. So that's why you didn't reach out to them. So it's a simple, short script that you can send them that tells them that you're not going to be able to work with them. And it's done in a polite way that if you find out later that this client is a great client and man, I really wish I could have worked with them, you haven't burnt any bridges. There's always the possibility of getting them again in the future. Now, another one of the red flags that I shared with you is when a client rudely challenges your fees. Now, as I mentioned last episode, challenging your fees is standard behavior. A lot of clients will do it. However, when a client starts to get rude or obnoxious about it, you need to remove yourself from that situation right away. And you use something like this. Dear client, thank you for considering me for your website design. I know my fees or my rate or my price, whatever you call it. I know my fees are not for everyone. I've spent many years developing my craft as a designer, and I've positioned my fees to reflect the level of service I provide my clients. I understand that you are looking for something in a lower price range. Perhaps you can contact and then insert a list or a designer or a list of designers that you think may take on the project. And then say, I believe he, her, or they, if there's more than one, may be able to help you where I cannot. I wish you success with your website project, logo design, whatever, regards, and your name. Now, if you don't want to provide a name or a list of designers, which is always handy, and the client would actually appreciate that. If you say, I can't, but here's some designers. So it's always a good idea to know some designers in your area that could handle that. And usually they're the designers that are working, I won't say below you, but at a lower level than what you're offering. And this happens regardless of what level you are at. Even if you're just new to this field, you're just starting out, there will be other designers around that are at the similar position. Maybe they wouldn't have a problem working with the client. So it's always a good idea to provide a list. But if you don't want to, say this client, there's really something bad about this client, and not just that they're disagreeing with your fees or that, but you really don't want to be the one to refer this client to somebody else. Then instead of saying that perhaps they can contact somebody else, change that paragraph to read something like, I understand you're looking for something in a lower price range. I believe you would be better served by a designer whose services are not as involved as mine are, and leave it at that. Now, you word it in a way like that, like whose services are not as involved as mine are. You don't want to say a designer who is less expensive or is not as expensive as I am. Because again, you're focusing on price there. And then again, they're saying, well, why are you so much more expensive than the other one? You are focusing on the services. So you say, you would be better served by a designer whose services are not as involved as mine are. And by saying that, you're telling them that you can probably get a better price because that designer isn't going to be as involved as I would be. And that's why I charge the fees that I do. So again, it's a polite way of saying that, maybe you can't afford me now and you're going to have to go to somewhere else. But you're doing it in a way that maybe down the line, if the client does have money and they decide, well, that person, they were charging a lot more, there must be a reason for it. They may come back to you in the future and you may decide to work with them. Now, a couple more red flags that I had last week were when a client expects you to be on call 24/7 or when a client wants to micromanage you. Now, not all may be lost with these clients. If you simply don't want to work with them, then you can use one of the other scripts, probably the first script that I shared with you. However, if you wish to try to save this client and maybe curve their overbearing behavior, you may want to try something like this. Dear client name, thank you for considering me for your website or logo or whatever. It sounds like an interesting project that I would love to work on with you. Before we get started, I'd like to share how I operate. My business hours are, and then you mention what hours you actually work. I expect all communications regarding your project via email or phone during my business hours. All correspondence regarding your design project is to be by email. Email documents our communications, so we each have a record of what was discussed in case we need to refer to it in the future. I will try to respond to emails promptly. I am reachable by phone during business hours. However, I do not accept any project changes, updates, or approval over the phone. Any changes or approvals will have to be sent by email. If you would like to move forward with this project, let me know and I will forward you my contract. Thanks again for considering me as your designer. Warmly, and then your name. Now, of course, include anything else in here that you want, such as how often you provide updates if that was in question, or how many revisions are allowed if you think that they are the type of client that might go over. You state all this stuff up front. And if they don't agree to it, it gives you a good parting away with the client. You don't have to go any further with them. But if they do agree to this, then you're going to send them a contract. This is not part of your contract. This is just a letter you send beforehand. And if they do agree, be sure that all these points are repeated in your contract, something they will actually sign, because it's one thing for them to agree to the letter, but it's completely different when it's in a contract and they sign it. That way, if they do start to become overbearing in that afterwards, you can refer back to the document that you both signed and agreed upon. Now, of course, I did word this script more the way I operate because I do have business hours, and I highly suggest you do work with business hours. Even if you work evenings and whatever, you work any time of the day, there should be certain times during the day that you will contact or have communication with a client. Myself, it's between 9 and 5. I will not reply to an email before 9 o'clock or after 5 o'clock, and I will not answer my business phone before 9 o'clock or after 5 p.m. Now, the correspondence via email is just for convenience. Maybe you're using something like Basecamp or, I don't know, whatever, one of those other platforms. In that case, change email to be one of those and insist that all communication regarding the project be via that platform. I use email because it's a way to document things. Every change that the client asks for, I have it in writing via the email. So if they tell me change it to this or insert this paragraph and there's an error in the paragraph and I copy and paste it, it's their error. I have proof that they sent it to me with the error in it. And it's not my responsibility to proofread their stuff. So adjust this letter any way you like. And again, if they decide that no, they don't like working this way, you haven't gone any further. You haven't done a contract. You haven't started working with them. You can just part ways at that point. But it does give a foundation to let them know that, listen, I don't want to be micromanaged and I'm not on call 24/7. You can also specify that you do not communicate with clients over Facebook or Twitter or whatever. If that's your case, maybe you do communicate over Facebook. I don't. Anytime a client tries to reach out to me over Facebook, I will tell them, please send me an email. Facebook is for my friends and stuff. I do not do business over Facebook. So that's a great one for, again, anybody who expects you to be on call 24/7 or whenever they need you, or somebody that's trying to micromanage you. Now, in the case where a client doesn't want to partake in your discovery process, whenever that happens, it's not only dismissing your abilities as a designer, but the client is actually doing themselves a disservice by not providing you with everything you need to do your job properly. In those cases, you can try something like this. Dear client, thank you for choosing me for your new branding. Design is more than a pretty image or layout. When done right, design solves a problem. The possible problems I'm facing with your project are, and then list some possible problems, not the problems you think you're actually going to solve, but just some generic problems that have to do with whether it's a website or a logo. List some potential problems that you may face. So again, the possible problems I'm facing with your project are, and then you list them. To pinpoint your exact problem and to come up with the perfect design solution, I need to find out everything I can about you, your company, and your clients. Only then can I create a design that will work for your needs. To accomplish this, I go through what's called a discovery process, in which I ask you questions that I need you to answer honestly. Only then, once I get to know you and your business, will I see the direction your project will need to take. Let me know when you will be available to talk. Regards, and then your name. So again, this is a great way. When the client says, I don't have time for this, explain to them why you have to go through this discovery process. And the client, two things will happen. Either the client will be impressed with what you're telling them and decide to go along with it, or the client will think this is still a waste of time in that, in which case you can say, sorry, this is the way I work. If you don't want to work like this, then, I'm not going to be able to continue with this project. Thank you very much for considering me. So it's almost like giving the client an ultimatum. Either you do this or we don't work together, but you're doing it in a polite, positive way. And then later, if the client decides that they're going to go somewhere else and they get some design done by somebody who doesn't go into the same depth that you would have, and they get something and it doesn't work for them or they're not happy with it, they may decide to come back to you and say, okay, I see your point. We didn't do discovery with this other client or this other designer and it just didn't work out. Let's see what you can do. And then you have a chance to work with them at that point. Now, in the cases when a client wants you to steal or copy another designer's work, as I mentioned last week's episode, just say no. I mean, you can't do this. But to explain it to the client, you would use something like this. Dear client, thank you for considering me for your whatever project. Regrettably, I'm not able to take on your project as described. What you're asking of me not only breaks copyright law, but it infringes on ethical standards. Designers are skilled professionals who deserve to be paid for their expertise. You are asking me to steal the work of another designer and pass it off on my own. This I will not do. What I can do for you is create something unique that will represent you in the best possible way. If you wish to discuss this possibility further, please contact me. Thanks again for considering me for your design project. Sincerely, and your name. Again, straightforward. No, you will not do what they're asking you, but you will do something unique for them if they will let you. This is another situation of it's yes or no. The client either wants to work with you and is willing to work on your terms, or if they really want to steal this other thing and just insert their name, they're going to have to find somebody else. It's one or the other. Now, in the case when a client doesn't want to sign a contract, then you might want to use a letter, something like this. Dear client, thank you for choosing me for your whatever project. I'm really excited to start working on it. I'm just waiting for you to sign the contract before any work can begin. Once I receive the signed agreement, I can start working on it. Thanks again for choosing me. Regards, and your name. Again, straight to the point, polite, and let them know that you're excited. You want to start working on it. You're just waiting for the contract. You cannot start working without the contract. And if the client comes back to you and says, well, just go ahead. I've got the contract signed. I'm going to put it in the mail. You let them know that you cannot, until you have the contract in hand, you will not work with them. If they're going to put it in the mail, tell them to priority it overnight to you. You'll have it the following day and then you can get started. If it's that important to them, then they will pay the extra for that to happen. Or they can send you an email, sign the contract digitally and email it back to you if that's the case. But without a contract, you shouldn't be starting a project, even with the promise that the contract is on the way. So this polite letter reminds them that once you receive the signed agreement, you can start working on it. Not once they agree to sign it, it's once you receive the signed agreement. And finally, the last one I want to share with you is when a client wants you to work for free or on spec or for exposure. In that case, you would respond to them with something like this. Dear client, thank you for considering me for your whatever project. It sounds like an exciting project. Regrettably, without proper monetary compensation, I will not be able to take it on. I've spent years developing my skills as a designer, and although I appreciate the offer of, and then insert whatever, if they wanted to, it'd make a great portfolio piece for you, or they'll give you great references, or you'll get great exposure. So you say, I appreciate the offer of exposure. However, such offers are a gamble, and there's no way to guarantee the sustainability of my business by taking it on. I'm sure you can appreciate that just like any other profession, I use my expertise as a designer to make a living. I cannot do that if I'm not compensated financially for the work I provide. Thanks again for considering me. I wish you success with your and whatever the project is. Regards, and your name. So again, very polite, telling them that just like any other profession, you expect to be paid, and that there's no guarantee that what they're offering you is going to help you at all. So why should you take that risk? And this is the type of letter that the client may go, okay, fine, I'll find somebody else to work with that will do it. In which case, you wipe your hands of it and don't worry about it. Or the client may go, yeah, you know what? They may have a good point here. Let's see what we have in a budget. Let's pay them for it, and so forth. But either way, you're not burning the bridges. Maybe the client may decide to go elsewhere, not like what they get, and then come back to you because you didn't burn any bridges. So those are some scripts that I have in case you have to turn down clients. Again, you can find all of these at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 134. Feel free to copy and paste them and change them and use them as you see fit. And let me know if you do. I'd love to know how you're using them. Or if you have something different, if you have a different script that you use for this sort of thing, please share it with me. Leave a comment for this episode by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 134. And let me know, what scripts have you used when you've turned down clients? And now, this week's question of the week. And this week's question comes from Audrey. And Audrey wrote, my question is regarding logos and what files and file sizes to give to clients. I understand the type of files, but just don't know which ones to provide a client who doesn't know ahead of time where their logos will be placed. So how can I be safe and provide them with all the right sizes and file types they'll ever need? I just want to make sure I cover all the necessary formats for where it could possibly be going. Pens, letterheads, vehicle wraps, billboards, etc. Well, thank you very much for the question, Audrey. Now, I can tell you what I do. Other designers may have different ideas, but first of all, I always design logos in Adobe Illustrator because I want a vector version of the logo. So it's just a given that any logo I design for a client, I will give them a PDF, a vector PDF. I will also provide them with a EPS file of the vector file, and I will provide them with an AI file, a .ai file, which are all, in essence, the exact same file. It just has a different file extension on them. But sometimes it helps the client out. Now, the great thing about vector files is they can be used on anything from the side of a pen to the size of a billboard. They can be enlarged or shrunk, and they will never lose quality. So that's why I create everything in Adobe Illustrator. Now, I always provide a color version, and I try to provide a black and white version. Now, black and white versions are not as popular as they used to be, but in some cases, like if you're going to put it on the side of a pen, sometimes a single color imprint is still what they need, so they would still need a black and white version of the logo. So I always provide a black and white version of the logo and a color version of the logo. Now, besides the EPS, PDF, and AI file, I usually provide a JPEG file, and that will be a high-res JPEG on a white background. And when I say high-res, I usually do it at 300 DPI, and I would do it on a standard letter size sheet of paper. So in North America, that's 8.5 inches by 11 inches. I would use that size of paper and just make the logo as big as possible, or not right up to the edge, but a good size on that paper. And that would be good if they need a JPEG for whatever, because they can always shrink the logo. It's when they try to enlarge it that it starts to deteriorate, it loses quality. So taking a larger logo and shrinking it will usually work out well. So I provide a JPEG at that size because really they don't need anything much bigger than that. Anything bigger, they can use as I said, the vector file, either the AI, EPS, or PDF file. But I do provide the JPEG just in case, because some clients, they just want a JPEG, whether they're going to use it in a PowerPoint presentation, they want to use it in Microsoft Word or whatever, they can use it and shrink it down. Now, in some cases, I might provide a smaller, like a 4x6 inch logo, just so they have two different sizes of it. Now, the last thing I will do is I will provide a PNG file, and that's a transparent file, so it's not on a colored background, it's transparent. And that one's for use if they want to put it on their website and it's on a color background or whatever. So I always provide that. And again, that one, it's not as high resolution because chances are it's going to be used for web only. So I usually provide mine in, I don't know, say 800 pixels in whatever direction. So if it's a tall logo, it'll be 800 pixels tall. If it's a horizontal wide logo, I'll provide it 800 pixels wide by whatever the other dimension ends up being. Now, that's just the way I do it. Other designers may have different ways. You mentioned SVG files in your email. I've never supplied an SVG file to a client. I don't work with SVG files myself because usually that's all I need is the vector, PDF, EPS, AI, a JPEG, and a PNG. And I give those to the client, and that covers just about anything. What will happen is whenever the client needs something for a pen, for a vehicle wrap, for a billboard, those places will ask for something. And chances are they'll say, well, do you have it as an AI or an EPS? The client can look and they'll say, yes, we do. And again, I provide both the black and white and the color version. And very rarely after supplying those will a client ask me for a logo. If they do, it's usually, Mark, we need our logo in the such and such a format. And I just email back to them and say, yes, I provided that to you whenever I designed the logo. You have that on file already. And they'll go, oh, I do? Because they'll get somebody that'll say, oh, I need a vector file. And the client doesn't know what that is. They don't realize that the EPS and the AI and the PDF that I gave them are vector files. So I'll just say, just forward those ones. And the client will go, oh, okay, thank you very much. I've got it. And that's it. Very, very rarely over the years have I had to do anything with a logo for a client, unless the logo required changes. But just taking a logo and resending it in a new format, very rarely has that ever happened. So that's kind of the cover your bases as far as file sizes and everything. With what I just mentioned, that pretty well covers almost all scenarios that you would encounter. And if by chance there's something that you don't supply that the client needs, you should have an archive of everything you do. And you can always come back and say, sure, I can provide that to you, but there will be a minimum charge for doing it. And I've done that for clients and say, yeah, I have it archived, but in order to go get it, retrieve it, I'll change it and all that, there'll be a minimum charge. And I'll charge them like $25 or something just to do it. And most of the time, the client will be okay with that. So I hope that answers your question, Audrey. I do appreciate you sending that in. Now, my mailbag is getting very low. I've only got 1 or 2 questions left. So now's a great time to submit yours. If you head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback, you could submit your question for me to answer on a future episode of the podcast. Now, I want to share another great iTunes review I received. This one came in from Darkside SVG from the UK, and it says, amazing advice. This podcast is essential listening. Mark's thought-provoking way of looking at design and the brilliant advice he gives should not be missed. I'm just starting my graphic design business in the UK, and the tips and tricks I've learned here have put me on the path to success. Thank you, Mark. Well, thank you very much. That really means a lot to me, especially when I hear that somebody is using my advice to starting their business and they see that things are working out because of some of the things that I've told them. So it means so much to me getting these things. I love these. This is the latest one I got in. So thank you. And thank you to everybody else, wherever you are in the world, who has submitted an iTunes review for the podcast. They don't help in the discoverability. They don't make it easier for people to find the podcast. But what these reviews do is when they do discover the podcast and they read the reviews, it does act as social proof that, yes, this is a podcast they want to listen to. It makes them more inclined to want to press play and listen. So thank you very much. So before I head out, I just want to take a quick second here to mention everybody who's supporting me on Patreon. There's Envision App and Dedicated Web Design, as well as Pamela, and then Ali. There's Curio Creative Agency, and then Peter, Yannick, Camilla, Benjamin, Josh, Wayne, Lisa, Modupe, and Stacy. Thank you so much for your contributions. It does mean so much to me. It doesn't matter at what level support you are, even if it's just $1 a month. It's as if you're buying me a cup of coffee every month, and I appreciate it so much. So thank you. And if you are not already a Patreon supporter and you would like to support Resourceful Designer, head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/Patreon. That's Patreon. And for as little as $1 a month, you too can become a supporter. So thank you very much for listening to this week's and last week's episode, a kind of a two-parter here. I hope that you never do have bad clients. It would be wonderful, but chances are the longer you stay in business, you will see these sort of people. So take the advice I shared last week and look out for those red flags I mentioned And when you do spot them, maybe use one of these scripts to turn them away or at least get them on board with the way you want to work. So drop me a line, let me know if you do use any of my advice here. I would love to hear it. And don't forget to register your .design domain name absolutely free before the end of September 2018 by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/porkbun, where you can register it there along with so many other great specialty domain names. Until next week, I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your graphic design business, and as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.